My name is Liz Arcane, and I am a singer, writer and educator. Versus. Hello, I'm Liz Arcane, singer, writer and educator. Welcome back to Versus, the podcast where I take an affectionately comparative look at the vocals and songwriting skills of two linked vocalists. However, this week it's a little different. This week it's Paul Heaton versus the band. What band? I hope you're not asking. The Beautiful South. Growing up in 90s Britain, and in fact in the south of 90s Britain, the Beautiful South were a stalwart backdrop to the music scene. Formed in 1988, they echo the social sarcasm of Morrissey alongside what initially might seem to be a relatively middle-of-the-road 90s top-of-the-pop sound, characterised usually by the combination of a male and female vocal, in fact, two male vocals, and then a range of female singers, with the kind of songs which seem to be designed to appeal to the everyman. The band was formed by Paul Heaton and Dave Hemingway. These two musicians had already had a great deal of success in the 1980s. With the band the Housemartins, and it's fair to say their best-known song was a cover called Caravan of Love. Now, I hope I'm pronouncing the original writers' names correctly, Isley Brothers, and it was actually originally written for them in their third iteration as the Isley Jasper Isley group. Now, when Paul Heaton and Dave Hemingway, along with others in the band, the Housemartins, covered the song, it was mainly a cappella, so just vocals and just a bit of close harmony. A very, very unusual sound for a top 10 hit. And indeed, it actually reached number 1 in December 1986 and just narrowly missed out on the Christmas number 1 that year. What I'm here today to talk about is 3 things only. 1, how fantastic Paul Heaton is as a musician, vocalist and lyricist especially. 2, the array of different singers that he worked with. And 3, what a fascinating dichotomy the band was musically and in terms of the rotating lineup, which seems strangely to have included a very large number of men called Dave. To begin with, the Beautiful South's almost eponymous album, Welcome to the Beautiful South, was released in 1989 and featured Paul Heaton and Dave Rotheray as the main vocalists. This is where the dichotomy begins for me. Musically, it has a real sound of tuneful melodies, catchy, pop, but with some definite influence from 1960s, for example, in the piano sound, and just in the rich tradition of songwriting in a sort of almost post-folk way, along with those rich rounded vocals. And we'll talk more about Paul Heaton versus Dave Rotheray's voices in a moment. But just because, as I said before, point number 3, was to think about what a strange dichotomy the band is as a whole. So if we think of that musical sound, which to me, to my young ears anyway, was just my parents' music and not cool at all, contrast that with the album cover, which featured 2 images, one of which was a woman with a gun in her mouth, and therein lies the dichotomy. Matching that musical sound along with the controversy of the album cover, which it's widely known that the high street shop Woolworths, rest in peace, refused to stock, doesn't really align. In fact, it really just reveals the core of the band, and that is the razor-sharp wit of Paul Heaton as a lyricist. Now, I feel their success lies in this clever juxtaposition. It allows them to sneak in rather challenging ideas beneath a sort of Trojan horse of relatively ambient indie music. One example of this is the Song for Whoever from that same album. In this song, the speaker is a songwriter who is looking for ideas in a plethora of quasi-romantic relationships. It takes around 3 listens to really grasp the wit of the actual lyrics, as the speaker refers to the PRS checks that you bring. Understanding what PRS is would take any non-songwriter a little bit of Googling. Now, we are here ostensibly to talk about the vocals of the group, although with a band this good, it's very hard not to go off on a tangent. Now, the Beautiful South are often thought of in terms of their female vocalists, and yet they didn't have a regular female singer as an official band member until after this first album. Even so, on track 7, they are joined by the inimitable vocalist Briana Corrigan, who has clear, clean vocals, and that lends a sort of moment of respite to the album. Her voice really cuts through. I think she must have a soprano voice or similar, but it has a real bright sound to it. It also brightens the album at the stage at which many people stop listening. Track 7, rather like the 7-year itch in marriage, is perhaps the time when a listener might choose to do something else with their hour. I feel this song, You Keep It All In, which features Briana Corrigan, is potentially very influential on artists like Stuart Murdoch of Belle and Sebastian. If you think of the memorable whistle introduction. And in the video, we have some schoolboys playing leapfrog to show there's a slight childishness to it. One thing I really, really like about the song is it shows disputes between men and women in marriage. Therefore, having a female vocalist adds to the themes of dissatisfaction because we see it from a second point of view, and also because on a surface level, inviting women to play a part in the Beautiful South's bigger social themes stops it from being too much of a metaphorical boys' club. After Briana Corrigan's guest appearance on the first album, she became a fixture of the band for albums 2 and 3, and a standout example of her vocals can be heard on the beautiful song A Little Time from 1990. Came from that and we hear Corrigan's somewhat childlike, bell-like soprano quite literally interrupting Rotheray, which seems like a fresh songwriting technique for a duet and a fresh idea even today. The music video for this song, by the way, is fantastic and an ironic take on the kitchen sink dramas of 1960s British film, such as A Taste of Honey or Catchy Come Home, as the pair gradually tar and feather each other in pure hatred. And it really interests me that Heaton himself doesn't appear on the song and doesn't appear in the video except in harmony and as the lead songwriter. Old Red Eyes is back from the band's third album, 0898, which was to be Corrigan's final for the band. I recall being a little bit afraid of this song as a child. The themes of alcoholism and dark misery run through the musically upbeat song in a typical example of Heaton's use of irony and juxtaposition. In a 2024 interview for The Guardian, Heaton spoke in depth about the band's use of alcohol as well as his own personal use. Rather ironically, the interviewer took him on a pub crawl. In the same interview, he talks to his wife about his lack of confidence, and she suggests he hates his own music, or at least thinks that others will. I'd like to jump ahead 2 years now to speak about a vocalist who for me epitomises the band. It's important to note, however, that this was the stage at which I best knew the Beautiful South, growing up alongside them, I suppose, and this opinion might scandalise other fans because Paul Heaton does seem to be the centrifuge of the band and Corrigan was the first female vocalist. But for me, it is all about another female vocalist, Jackie Abbott. At the time, a relative unknown, Abbott joined the band for their fourth studio album, Meow, in 1994. This was at a stage of the band's arc at which they were often described as depressing by music journalists. But for me, that is missing the point. I think they were always depressing. Except that in their initial iteration they managed that strange tightrope balancing act, the same as bands like The Cure, wherein their music had a jauntiness which belied the dark lyricism and themes of the actual song. There were some exceptional songs on this album, but by far the most successful was a cover of Everyone's Talking, which by dint of being sung solely by Abbott seems almost like a completely disconnected single and nothing to do with the band. This year marked the release of their first best-of album, and if I were Abbott, I'd be annoyed. To join a band in the same year their best-of comes out doesn't seem to bode very well. Yet Abbott is a key and memorable feature of the band, particularly in 1996's album Blue is the Colour. The first song, an extremely successful single, Don't Marry Her, was a return to form musically and lyrically, focusing on the bitterness of the end of a relationship. Interestingly, a contemporary reviewer from Music Week, giving the song 3 out of 5, criticised Abbott's voice of being too saccharine. They obviously didn't hear the expletive, full, non-clean version, which you can find on YouTube. Personally, I don't think that Abbott's voice is saccharine at all. I don't know if this is alto to alto vocalist sympathy, having a similar low voice and a similar sound, which I would have to say is highly influenced by Abbott, particularly her cover of Mama Cass's Dream a Little Dream. I have always found Abbott's voice to be a strong alto and a powerful conveyance for Heaton and Rotheray's songwriting. She has quite a laconic sound to her vocals. But let's come back to Heaton. After all, whilst there are myriad things to talk about regarding the band, Heaton for me is the core member, with my apologies to Rotheray and to Hemingway and all the other Daves that were involved in making The Beautiful South. Now, one real benefit of the album, Blue is the Colour, is a chance for us to hear Paul Heaton's voice singing his own lyrics on the song Blackbird on the Wire. I remember hearing that on the radio and eventually hearing it in the album and being transfixed by the way the song is written and the way that the lyrics and the sound create a mise-en-scène all of their own. He has such a characterful, powerful voice, and just to be there by himself singing some fairly serious lyrics for him on this sort of bossa nova, moody romantic ballad is finally a chance for Heaton himself to shine, and if we're really honest, to shine in a rather pervy way, as the lyrics are concerned with some serious objectification of women, which you can see played out in the actual music video, where he creeps up stealthily to a woman who is frozen in time on the dance floor. There are numerous albums after this. Quench in 1998 with the single Perfect 10, which seemed to be the soundtrack to my secondary education. Painting It Red in 2000, Abbott's final album for that fallow period of the band with a conceptual 20 songs and just 2 singles, neither of which reached the top 10. Another best-of in 2001, humorously called Solid Bronze, and a covers album in 2004 featuring new vocalist Alison Wheeler, who joined in 2003. But with The Beautiful South, the segment of their success which you best relate to will strongly depend upon your age, your upbringing, or you might have ruled them out years ago as being too gentle, something I almost did myself, as well as that because their songs are often concerned with topical things. Perhaps they don't align with some of the viewpoints of today. So I'd be interested to know what people think about whether they are still a valid act today or whether their lyrics have made them outdated. Thinking that they are too gentle, however, would be a terrible fallacy. And just like everybody reaches the age of 40 and realises simultaneously that Simply Red were actually rather good, perhaps it's time for a revisit to the Beautiful South and their sound of the beautiful North. Paul Heaton is clearly, undeniably, a poet. If I was to make one wish for 2025, therefore, it would be for Paul Heaton to write an autobiography. I would love to read his perspective on all of his years and his long legacy of working with the band, to understand some of his complex thoughts, witticisms, ideas. He's got one of those brains that I just think I would love to crack open and have a look around in. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Versus Verses. This is the 5th and final episode of Series 1, comparing linked vocalists. And after a week's hiatus next week, I'm going to be exploring original songs and a cover version of the same song to work out who sang it better.